We want to get right to today's session. So pleased to welcome Sandi DuBowski here. I saw Sabbath Queen at Tribeca when it premiered. I think it was the opening night. The opening premiere screening. And it's just, hopefully you guys got a chance to see it this week. And if you did, it is just a remarkable film in every sense of the word. And Sandi is also, well known to many of you here. He's one of the most beloved figures in the documentary world. He's done so much good with his activism and organizing and his work for the Good Pitch. And are you still working for Doc Society, Sandi? No? Okay. But
then I definitely wouldn't sleep.
he's got a foot in a million doors organizationally, works with the creative, founder of the Creative Resistance, just so much great work. So on that alone, just wanted to acknowledge you and thank you for all that you do for us. We could spend all day talking about the film and what it's about and all the themes that it deals with. But we are filmmakers, and Sandi is coming from this. It's a very unusual case, Sabbath Queen. It was 21 years in the making. It's now pretty much a full year of being shown in festivals and theatrically around the world. And so we want to really focus on the film aspect of it today, which might be unusual for you, Sandi, because, God knows how your Q&As are going, I know, from the first one, because you often do it with the Rabbi, too. So he's not going to talk about how he went about editing mountains of footage and stuff like that. So let's start with, I want to start, oftentimes when we talk to other filmmakers and offer advice about filmmaking, we start with like, well, what are your goals for the film? What do you hope it will do in the world? And then kind of work backwards from there. Now, obviously, you didn't know this was going to take 21 years to complete, but you're always so focused on outreach and on impact. Were you, so when you began this project, did you have a goal in mind in terms of that, or what were your goals when you started out?
So
And how
first,
did they change?
first, just thank you, Doug, for this community and for having me. And it's great to be on here with so many people that I really go back in time with. And it's actually interesting because I really think of this film as a midlife project. Like I couldn't make this film in my 20s, in my 30s. This film's about time. And I'm 54 now, and it really feels like a real fruition of so many of the life journeys of relationships, film community. Like it really feels like a real fruition. And I don't think I realized that when I began, because I went to Jerusalem in the 90s, in the late 90s, to look for people to be in my previous film, Trembling Before God. And everyone kept saying, well, you should talk to the chief rabbi of Israel's gay nephew, Amichai. Um, I asked Amichai to be in Trembling. He refused because he said that he was too much of a, well, basically, he said, I don't do collage. Um, he's too much of a diva. He wanted his own movie. So, um, in all fairness, Trembling was so much about belonging within Orthodoxy, and he was already post-denominational, smashing the box, but we became friends, and we really developed a deep trust and an intimacy over 5 years, and then I began filming in 2003. So I think at that point, I was very much into Hadassah, the glitter, the wig, the drag, the kind of counterculture rituals that Amichai and storytelling were doing. I don't think Amichai and I really knew the journey that we would go on over 2 decades, and that he would even become a rabbi. So, this film was so much about patience and about allowing story to unfold and allowing life and all its twists and turns to unfold, and really just kind of running this ultra marathon and being a documentary filmmaker who was just there to do the deep listening and wait patiently for a story to arc and complete.
When did it, what were the different places along the way where it changed, where you noticed the story changing? Did
Yeah.
you, and where did you think it was going to go at the beginning, and where were the turning points?
I think a huge turning point was him saying he was going to become a rabbi. Um, that was unexpected, and that he would go conservative Jewish. Um, so at that point, I remember Philip and I, talking so much about the mythic journey and the hero Shiro's journey. And, I think originally I thought, oh, great, he'll become a rabbi. That ordination ceremony will be the end of the film. And it was so clear that it's not about getting a title. It's about what a character does with the title, how they make that change in the world. And when Amichai was really facing this dilemma of interfaith marriage, that felt like a real choice, and one that could be argued either way. I mean, certainly his Orthodox rabbi brother, Benny, you know, is going to argue it very differently than Amichai. And so when he was faced with this real choice, and he actually, was forced to resign and was kicked out, then that felt like, aha, the end of the film in the act three. But there were, the whole question of Hadassah, of whether this character was going to live or die, and moving, taking off the wig, taking off the mask, stepping out of the high heels, into his rabbinic self without this drag character. That was a real turning point. Him having children, becoming a queer bio dad. So there were all these things that I knew I had to kind of capture along the way. And there were so many strands of the film that it felt like, I mean, his life, his identity is so kaleidoscopic that I was like following all these narrative trails, not necessarily knowing always how they were going to knit together, and how we would actually construct the film in the edit. So, yes, I filmed 1,800 hours, 1,100 hours of archival. I mean, it was an enormous mountain, and it took around really 6 years of editing.
Um, when did you, well, first of all, the shooting wasn't continuous. It was in, I assume,
Yeah.
fits and starts. How did that process work? Would you just shoot for a while, get more financing to shoot? I mean, you had some really top DPs on this,
Mhm.
so that's not inexpensive. Did you like just shoot until you ran out of money and then started fundraising again? Was that basically your MO?
I mean, everything was in a parallel process. And, just the way that I approached this was too kind of unique of a project to allow anyone else to sort of dictate final cut or timelines. I think I really wanted to be free of that. And so I think I threw now, I think it was 15 benefit parties. So a lot of my work was also just being a producer, throwing benefit parties, building host committees, reaching out to donors and foundations in New York, in DC, in San Francisco and LA and Miami and Chicago and Boston and Philly. Like, I was really trying to galvanize circles of support, you know, and that led to me, also bringing on board executive producers, who came on for, co-executive producers. So it was like foundations, individual donors, executive producers. And, I had done some markets like Sheffield and, um, Tribeca, but really it felt like steer clear of the kind of broadcast streamer, world, which now I'm so thankful that I did. And and they were always like, yeah, this sounds really amazing, but bring us a rough cut. Um, so yeah, I think there was a lot of parallel tracking and me continually taking on and off my director hat, my producer hat. Um, so yeah, I mean, I was playing many roles in this film.
Yeah. Were you doing much editing while you were shooting at that point? I mean, and if you were, how did you tackle all the footage? I mean, what were you working on first if you were editing as you go along?
So really it was editing for fundraising.
Okay.
So, Jeremiah Zagar, I don't know if people saw We the Animals, where we
Hmm.
created the first trailer. We spent a summer working and really just trying to pull together like a 6-minute trailer. And I used that for a lot of different fundraising, at benefit parties, for funds like Sundance, Documentary Fund, Catapult Film Fund actually gave me my first grant to work with Jeremiah, um, which was, an incredible experience. And then Philip and I cut a 30-minute sample reel of 3 scenes and we kind of zeroed in on that scene, especially at the 2014 Israel Hamas war, Israel's war in Gaza, in the 2014 scene where the woman says to him, "I wish you should have died in the Holocaust." Um, so that was, a really great experience to kind of have that work with an editor, really have their perspective on the footage, um, over those two chunks of time. Um, so yeah, I mean, I couldn't tackle all the footage, but I could certainly glean directions, of where we should go.
At what point did you look at all the footage, or did you look at all the footage? I mean, that probably would have taken months to do, right? And did any of the
Good.
editors you worked with look at all the footage?
I mean, Philip and I looked at like almost all the footage. I mean, there was a whole like the editing process was very long. And um yeah, the last 2 years I was working with Francisco Bello and Jeremy Stolberg as the writer editors and had and kept moving the film, in a whole for example, we realized that, we had verite, we had incredible verite, we had a lot of interviews, but we needed to do more. We did 3 more interviews with Amichai to really keep honing in on things that we felt were missing. Um we realized that we needed animation to be another language in the movie because, for example, I would say we need to do this Sabbath Queen Friday night, you know, scene. And Francisco and Jeremy would say, well, actually, there's no shift. Amikai's not changing. This is not like a plot driven scene. It's a ritual. You documented a ritual. And we don't think it belongs in the film. And I said, well, this is why I'm making this film. I want people to experience being immersed in Lab Shul and what it means for Amikai to lead through this kind of feminine, divine, everybody friendly, God optional, artist driven ritual. This is not what people are experiencing in not just in Judaism, in so many religions. So I just said that's really crucial. So we really wrestled with how to tell that scene. And and bringing in the animation so that we had the drag character Hadassah, as the kind of feminine divine like dive into the bottom of the Dead Sea, to release the Shekinah, to release the feminine divine out of the clutches of patriarchy, to save the world. Like once we had that and we could weave the verite with Amichai's voiceover, you know, with the animation, then we had access to a whole other mystical language.
Yeah.
And we had access to a language of the ancient, in the animation. I mean, my lookbook for the animator was medieval illuminated manuscripts. Um, so that was really exciting for me. I'd never worked with animation before. Um, so that was like a big turn in the edit. And I think also just montage. Montage became, we needed to play with time. Once we were released of the linear and we were fully nonlinear, and we could bounce back and forth between the Roman era and World War II and the 2024, and we could really move in time as long as we sort of grounded the audience in those movements, but also to really create, the hardest thing in this film in some ways was that Amichai was, while he seemed so, open, there is some of, he's very actually quite protective. And, this was the first time that all of his identities, the radical fairy, the Orthodox, ultra Orthodox Hasidic, Holocaust dynasty of his family, the rabbinic dynasty, the kids, the seminary, like Amichai lives in so many worlds that never see each other. So this film was the first time that all these worlds would see each other. They were all integrated together. And that was, I think, a little scary for Amichai. And he was quite protective around, where we could film. And there was a lot of tussling around that. So we needed to create an opposition. So we had like opposition montage footage, and I had to really do deep archival searches, to build a Holocaust story, to build a radical fairy story, to build the Orthodox opposition story. Like, so that also emerged in our editing as like another, you were asking about like where, like what were the milestones, and that was a big creative milestone: animation and montage.
I just want to make it clear that we will save the last half hour for questions from those attending today. There are a lot of great questions in the chat, but I have a bunch of my own first. But you referred to Philip a couple of times. This Philip Shea, a D-Word ambassador who is here often. But Philip, do you actually mind coming on camera for a sec? Because
Sure.
I'm very curious to hear from your perspective as an editor, how much footage when you kind of were brought on by Sandi, how did you attack all this footage? It wasn't everything yet at that point. What year was this? Are we talking about?
2017, I think.
Okay, which I think is the
Um,
year it actually starts the film. But
yeah,
so uh, you
but
were
there
dealing.
was a substantial amount of footage. I mean,
So
there
how
was
did you attack it? I
1,100.
wondered, yeah, what were
Sorry.
some of the questions as an editor when Sandi hired you? What were the discussions that you had to bring out the story? Was Sandi very clear about it at that point, or was he still trying to kind of figure it out? And how did, as an editor, how do you bring that out of a director and work with them to bring it out?
Yeah, well, we had worked together on the trailer or the fundraising video, half-hour sample reel, and that was incredibly helpful. And so I had some sense of the story. But yeah, I mean, the way I remember it, Sandy, was it was uncertain in the sense that Amichai was still living his life, so we didn't know, what was going to happen next. But it was very much, we were going to, give you a portrait of Amichai. And the extraordinary thing about Amichai is that he lives at the, or, he's constantly jumping fences in a way, and living at the conjunction of different things which are either opposing or somewhat opposing. And the amount of those things was extraordinary. I can't think of many people that are like that. And, you know, I think Sandi, one thing I just want to say is sort of separately just from the editing is that there's two words that I would apply to Sandi and apply to you, Sandi, and that is courage and vision. And like in the biggest sense of the word. I mean, the amount of courage it took to stick with the film, but yes, there were great cinematographers, but Sandi also filmed a lot of this himself, you know, and just was present at so many points of Amichai's life, and in that verite way of like not really knowing what's going to happen, but just let's just capture it. And we're going to go to Budapest, right? We're going to go here, we're going to go there, and occasionally it would erupt into a huge argument, like at the rally at the United Nations or something. But other times it's just sitting and talking, and Sandi's relationship to Amichai was so integral to the film. And I know that I'm sort of weaving all over the place, but that is one of those things that as an editor, you kind of think about at the beginning, you know, is that going to be part of the story or is it not? And I think that was,
Sandi, wasn't it a big part of it for quite a while? Didn't you spend many months trying to integrate yourself in your relationship with Amichai into the film?
Well, actually, that more came up again with Francisco and Jeremy, because I think they really tried to, they basically said to me, we need a narrator. And I was like, okay, who's that narrator? And they
Brad
said,
Pitt was busy, right?
yeah, they said, it's you. I was like, what? They said, yes, you need to be the narrator. We are seeing you all over the footage. You're so in the interaction between you and Amichai. And I was like, oh my gosh, I did not set out to make a personal film called My Rabbi and Me, you know? So, but we did a whole string out of all these interactions between Amichai and I. We had like 2.5 hours. And, you know, the truth is that Amichai did, you know, he buried my father. Like he comforted my family in a year of mourning. He officiated my interfaith queer wedding with my husband. So we actually brought in my wedding. We brought in my father. We started bringing in Trembling on the Road, and every time we would do a test audience, they would say, "Well, who is that director? We need to know more about that character." And so we'd build more, and then after 9 months, we did a test screening for a group of filmmakers and editors, and they said, "Sandi, we love you. Get out of the movie." So we took all of that work over 9 months and just like threw it to the ground. And what emerged in that space was Benny, was Amichai's brother. And he became a real spine of the film and the counterpoint and the way to kind of really build the context and conflict. So that was so illuminating. And, you know, in the end, it was like I was just scaffolding, you know, build the building, architect, and, you know, I was scaffolding, remove, and the building stood. So, but it was a really very interesting kind of editing and storytelling lesson.
Also,
I would
so
say also, Doug, I just mentioned that that is in these kind of films that is the one of the most common um things, you know, is the person in it, are they not? I've been on so many biographical films that were often made by someone who was related to the person or admired them or whatever, or had come to know them incredibly well. And there's always that moment of that discussion, and the person, the director, often is the director, doesn't want to be in the film, and you then, and sometimes they go, and you usually try. I mean, at some point, I think you want to say, let's try it, you know,
yeah,
and sometimes they stay in it, sometimes they don't, but yeah.
yeah. And the worst part is when they're, you know, they're either in it all the way or they're not. You know, you
They're
can't
not, you know.
in these things in personal docs. So interesting about Benny and his role in the film because, you know, in terms of story arcs, this is a really clear, very moving, you know, story arc. And Amichai is a kind of fractured arc. You know, it just leaps all over the place in time.
Mm.
You get a feel for his arc, but it's not the same kind of I'd say emotional payoff
Hmm.
as it is with Benny. Um, so how did you consider that at all in the editing, or was that just a sort of a deliberate choice to play them off aesthetically that way?
Honestly, when Benny showed up at Amichai's ordination, um, that was my opening because that was a big deal for him to come to this seminary and a religious movement that he didn't really find legitimate. But he did it and he showed up. And so I asked him to be in the film and he said yes. But I waited then 13 years to ask his brother. So
Amazing.
once he said yes, I flew to Jerusalem a month later and did a 2 hour interview.
Yeah.
That's all it was. But we built it like an arc
Yep.
from rejection to acceptance. And, he says that line that just made me weep during the interview, which is the closet is death. And, having done Trembling Before God, and spent so many years with ultra Orthodox and Orthodox rabbis, like that is just an astonishing, beautiful statement. Like Amichai changed him. Queer people change people. Like, and I think there's something really moving about the two brothers. And it's so interesting because, we did a Jerusalem and Tel Aviv premieres around Hanukkah this year in December, January. And his brother came to the screening. But he didn't just come. He actually came on stage and did the Q&A panel with us. And all of Amichai's Orthodox cousins and nephews and nieces and mom and siblings came to these screenings. And it was really incredible. A month later, the family did a meeting to process the film together. And for the first time in 30 years, process what it meant for Amichai to come out as gay, to leave Orthodoxy, to leave Israel, to become a drag queen. Like this was a major milestone for the family.
Was that the first time Benny had seen the film?
No, no, I showed it to him before, even just as we were finishing it.
Right.
Um, you know, um, Out of respect,
Yeah.
to the relationship. Um, but yeah, there's something about these two brothers, especially in these polarized, toxic times where there's so much divide and there's so many relationships that have been broken, that these brothers are real role models of what it means to show up. Because when he came to that panel, he came with love, he came with respect, he came with disagreement, and he came with discomfort. And I think, that kind of difficult dialogue and sitting in discomfort is so much a part of this work.
Yeah. It's so interesting what you touched on, that it was one long interview and yet intercut in the film. Um, as filmmakers, we know it's the same interview, and yet it totally works as an arc over time, as if he were appearing at all these different places along the way. It's just, fascinating how that works.
Yeah.
I want to get back to a filmmaking question, which is Philip touched on earlier about you have a very strong vision of the film and that you did a lot of the cinematography yourself. So how do you work with a cinematographer, especially a very experienced one? Is it just you talk through what you're looking for in in the scene and then
Mhm.
kind of let them go at it? Do you actually give them any kind of direction while they're filming? What is that like for you?
I would say the person who really journeyed the most with us was Dan Gold. Um, you know, and he really developed, certainly like um, it was Dan, Kirsten, um,
Wolfgang Held?
Nadia, Wolfgang, Dror in Israel, um, and then yeah, I mean Layla did mainly kind of sit down interviews later on, but I would say in terms of like the verite, Dan really developed a rapport with Amichai, and we developed a language. And look, a lot of it with Amichai was also like, can we get the wireless? Like Judy Karp did sound, and then Sean
Right.
O'Neill, and can we get the wireless mic on him? When's the right time to approach it? What kind of temperament is he going to be today? Like it was a lot of really kind of careful
Right.
calibrating about how to give him space, especially when there were people that he was interacting with, because so much of being, at least being a rabbi, is like there's such sensitive and delicate lines around what's private, what's public. You know, you're interacting with somebody and, they could be sharing very, details about their inner life and their struggles. You're filming a religious ritual where people are going through an emotional roller coaster. And like, how do you, like, so much of this was about sort of individual, familial, and communal respect, about like where were the lines. And, when Amichai called me from, he called me from Costa Rica. He was officiating a wedding and he said, my dad just died. And I said, like we both were burst into tears. We're crying on the phone. And, I'm there really as his friend. And remember, I'm wearing so many hats here. He's a friend to me. He's a rabbi to me. I'm a congregant. And I'm also a director and he's a protagonist. So, in that moment, it was just friends. And then he hung up and said, well, he said, I have to fly to Miami, fly to Berlin, fly to Tel Aviv, and get to the funeral. We hung up and I said, I have to film this funeral. Like as a director, I have to film. So I called um, this filmmaker and rabbi couple in Jerusalem, and I said, you know what? I This could be a state funeral. There could be other media. So why don't you go and be the moral compass and be like my sort of person there? Because Amichai, when I texted him and I said that I've packed, I'm going to the airport, I'm coming, he said, don't come. He said it's going to be too sensitive. So I was really facing this dilemma about what to do. And once I had this rabbi and filmmaker couple, Levi and Paula, I said, just be there and look, if there's no other media, then it's private. Send the crew home. But if it's like, if there is other media there, clearly it's like, it's public, it's open. Um, and that was a really complicated choice because I decided not to tell Amichai because I knew he would say no. And so this was definitely one of these directorial, kind of ethical moments where I really had to weigh everything. Um, in the end, like there was a camera and it, was panning and it stopped on him and Amichai said, "Oh, okay, Sandy's here." Like, but it was challenging to negotiate and navigate all these boundaries, as a director with someone who I was very, very close to and, who, just had a lot of concerns. This is a very public family. They're the Kennedys of Judaism. It's a real dynasty. They have serious power and weight, you know. So I had to do a lot of like very delicate navigating.
Did you show him much in the way of, edited scenes as you went along? How much did you actually bring him in to that?
So I had a contract with him, which was about meaningful input. Um, he wouldn't have final cut, I would have final cut, but there was contractually, that. And he did see the trailer, he saw the sample reel that Jeremiah and Philip and I created. And then I showed him the film before it was done. So many tissues, many, a lot of hand holding. Um, and, he really, I think he was a little stunned because, it's like you're presenting someone with their life, 21 years. He was like, you filmed that? That moment's in the film? Like he was just so, just amazed. And really moved, really deeply, deeply moved. I think he's been burned by the media. I mean, Chief Rabbi of Israel, drag queen, like, he's had that. And so I think there was some, like, my commitment and my deep, long commitment to get it right and to really do justice to his story in all of its shades and all of its complexity and nuance meant a lot to him.
Yeah.
So we just changed one word actually, which was in the kind of post October 7th.
At his request or yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we changed the word but to an and, so that because the film is so non-binary in so
Mhm.
many ways. Like it's so much non-binary and around gender and sexuality and Israel Palestine and Jew not Jew. And I think we had I hold the pain of my Israeli family, but our trauma and need for safety does not justify Israel killing and starving tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. This horror must stop. Amichai said, change the but to an and. You know, I hold the pain of my Israeli family and our trauma and need for safety. Really, again, the both and, not the either or. Like,
Right.
let's hold the both.
My guess is in that 1,800 hours of footage, you had an and in there that you could
Well,
butt in.
actually, I
Butt
remember
in.
he was in Israel. We were in the sound mix because
Uh-huh.
we were trying to finish the film in the fall, and then October 7th happened. So we were really wrestling with like how to tell that in a kind of coda way because we didn't have room then for another scene. We weren't going to open the film up again completely. So it was really a complicated navigation because every image, every word in this film is such a minefield. Um, Particularly that. So he was in Jerusalem saying, in his phone, like voice memo, like and, like doing many and versions.
Um, I'm curious, did you, in the parts that you filmed, did you ever do it as a one-person crew where you were just sort of hanging out and you happened to have camera? These days it would be like an iPhone, a really good iPhone,
Right.
would grab something quickly.
Yeah.
Uh, did you
Yeah,
do much of that?
I did. I mean, like that scene at the UN in 2014 during the war, that was just me. Wireless,
Mhm.
like wireless mic shotgun, um, you know, and just me, I'm not, I don't really, I don't label myself a cinematographer, but I had such access to Amichai and you know, we had that intimacy and often he really just, he was, often he just wanted me. He's like, couldn't you just do this with you and your camera? And do you really need so every
Well, that
time.
was that was the point of my question was, did you sense him interacting in any kind of different way when you had a bigger crew there? And how big a crew size would it be with you clearly had a DP and a sound person.
Yeah.
Did you have anybody else or just kept it at three?
Um, Usually I had like someone who was doing media management slash assisting. I had an associate producer, Cherry and John, who's really amazing, who um he did a lot of the shoots with us. So sometimes it would be three, but remember that we were like a family. We were shooting over so many years that, I mean, you know, Dan and his wife and kid would come to Lab Shul, and come for the high holidays. Like there were all these like layers. I mean, we shot over the 25-hour Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, like the high holidays, like year after year. Um, I mean, there was just there's so much hours of material that, um, but yeah, I think there was something that came from when Amichai and I were together. Um, I remember that when we were like in early days, we were in Jerusalem I think with Dan, and I didn't even know where to stand. It was like in those early days, it was like I was like standing next to Dan and the camera, and Amichai was like, "Why are you standing over there?" I'm like, well, I'm making the film. I'm the director. And he's like, no, you're my sidekick. Come over here. And he wanted me to stand with him and be with him on camera. So there was a lot of like, where are the lines? Who am I, in this filming process?
Yeah, it's it's so fascinating. When did you? I know that you thought initially that the filming might stop when he was ordained as a rabbi. When did you know when to stop filming
Mm.
past that? When you were following him beyond that? And were there several times where you thought it was going to be done filming and kept going?
I think when he decided, like, he tried to be on the inside. This is, Amichai is always trying to figure out inside outside, and I think he was like, I'm going to play the inside game. I'm going to become a rabbi, and and that will enable me to argue and fight, with the Orthodox and with the power structure. I'll get that title. Um, which meant that he couldn't do interfaith marriage, which was, I mean, I have a friend who, like, he had decided that, and he was supposed to officiate her wedding and couldn't do it, Um, so once he then tried to say, I am going to do interfaith marriage, like I think it was a year after graduation, because Amichai is not the most patient person. Like he just wants to like make change. So, um, yeah, I think once he decided to do that, and I was following all the twists and turns of that deliberation and that decision, and then he was forced to resign and was kicked out, and he paid a price that felt like the end of the film. That was a great end of Act Three. Um, so yeah,
Right. And then October 7th happened and whoops,
yeah.
gotta have a coda. So let's talk a little bit about the fundraising during this 21-year period. It came in bits and pieces. You said you did house parties and grants mainly.
Grants, house parties, and executive producers, co-executive
So
producers.
without getting into what the entire cost was, let's just say, what did you budget for it, and did you get close to your budget?
No, the budget kept changing. You know, like it kept evolving and growing, and it was for a longitudinal film like this, it's a bit hard to plan. So it was so much about like, okay, we need this, keep raising, need this, keep raising. Like, like it wasn't I think that there was so much unknowing around this. So that's why I kept doing benefit parties and kept writing grants and kept reaching out to funders. I mean, our credit list is so long. Um, I mean, every time I show it in a theater, I'm like, do we play the whole credit list or do we just lights up, sound down, and the scroll? Um, but it also feels like, in some ways, that way that I approach the fundraising is so mirrored in the way that I'm approaching distribution. It's so much about circles of community and circles of investment. Like everywhere I'm going, I mean, I'm on the road now. This is like my 111th Q&A. We're in 50 cinemas now. We're
You're
in
not close to trembling.
yeah, great. Trembling was 850, so I'm like 851. But but yeah, I think we're like I'm moving city by city, and so many of these relationships that I've developed from doing this kind of approach around fundraising and distribution over Trembling Before God, over Jihad for Love, which I produced, over Boudros, which I co-produced, over Good Pitch. Like there's a real continuity. And so it's kind of amazing. Like just everywhere we're going, there's like, I'm doing a very in-person hybrid distribution in cinemas, and like the piece around the creation and the producing and the fundraising is going hand in hand with the impact, the outreach, and the fundraising for now. um so yeah, it's a real kind of way that I work that has really reaped so many benefits.
So we'll get back to this hybrid distribution idea shortly, but I want to ask when you did, we're always talking about fundraising here and how to go about it.
Yeah.
So house parties,
Yeah.
how did that work for you? What did you show at a house party? You know, how long, how did you talk about it to them?
Mhm.
Uh, and how did you do the ask? Did you have somebody who, you know, played that role for you?
Yeah. Well, luckily there's no printing costs anymore. I used to do, invites on paper. So, no need for like everything's digital. So I would have a host committee. I would have somebody who would offer their home. Um, I had sometimes like sort of lead co-hosts, like the party was hosted by Jeff and Audrey, and then there would be a list of other hosts. So sometimes it was a big host committee, sometimes it was just like two people, one person, a few people. Beautiful home donated, and usually I'd try to get the host to donate food and drink. Um, that was key. 6 to 8, 6:30 to 8:30, latest 7 to 9. Um, and usually after the first hour, there's mingling, hors d'oeuvres, drinks, and then after the first hour, we would do the program. And the program would be the host introduced me, I would introduce the film. I would show either the 6.5 minute trailer, or later on I would show the 30 minute, um, and then allow time for Q&A. And then ideally I wouldn't do the pitch. I would have either the host do the pitch, or I would have somebody who was a friend of the project or a funder of the project. And then I would pass out cards, benefit cards, and then also give people the link to my fiscal sponsor, and then follow up with an email to them the next day. Thank you so much for coming. Here's a way that you can forward this to people who could give. Um, and here's where you can give more. So that was really the kind of choreography, of the benefit party.
Did you find that the shorter trailer got better results than the 30 minutes, or was longer better?
I think they were appropriate for different stages. I think, the trailer, the 6.5 minute was great when I was really in production. But as I was really moving towards, you know, raising money for post-production, I think people wanted to see more scenes. And it was helpful to have something that actually was more extended, because they could feel like they're in a movie, as opposed to a trailer where, and 6.5 minutes, I wouldn't necessarily say that's a magic number, you know, like this is where we landed on, um, I'm curious what ChatGPT would say about, like, which is the ideal length for a trailer or a sample reel. Um, but yeah, I think it worked well at those different stages. And certainly like when I was showing, the scene of the protest that Amichai was doing, around the 2014 war, like it was pretty gripping. And like when, and this happens in audiences when the woman says you should have died in the Holocaust, like there's a gasp, like an audible gasp from all my audiences in the room, just like you could feel the
Yeah.
intensity. And so I think that was really helpful, because, just having, like, it was a little like just this film, like just having the drag wouldn't be enough. Having Amichai as drag character, which was originally more of the story, and as the film evolved and got deeper and more intense and more, um, the stakes grew, I think to share that was really important about extremism. What does it mean?
Could I just,
Hatred and extremism. Yeah, Philip.
Philip, is that you?
yeah, Doug, I just wanted to have that,
Sure.
ask Sandy to mention that the 30-minute thing wasn't just sort of, oh, a 30-minute trailer. It
Yeah.
was like kind of genius in its structure. So if you want to just, Sandy, if you want to just tell people like the three different things, and, you know, this sort of, well, from my point of view, there was three scenes. It was one was a verite rally where Amichai was very confrontational and other people were confrontational. Then you had a verite scene of him in his drag character teaching, not just in drag, but teaching,
Yeah.
right? Which was so profound and so like, oh, I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, oh, it's not just drag entertainment, he's teaching and in this community where he was beloved and it was a very colorful kind of
Mhm.
Purim scene. And then there was a scene of him as a rabbi,
Yeah.
very, in sacred mode. And I feel like, even those three didn't represent the full range
Agreed.
of the film, but they were so different, I feel like, and so powerful, so emotional, right? I mean, people were dying by the end of it,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a good way.
So let's touch on what you mean by hybrid distribution, Sandy, and what you're doing with your, outreach, impact, and distribution efforts, and then we'll get to questions. So, folks, if you want to ask anything in the last half hour, use the raised hand function, and I will call on you. So, how do you define a hybrid distribution in your case? It's all, it's a vague
Yeah.
term sometimes.
So, and I'm really adopting the language of John Reese,
Yeah.
who came on board. So we had a world premiere at Tribeca in June 2024. And John really was on board in the spring, really helping me to strategize. It was a really complicated time post October 7th, and people were quite, you know, sometimes unable to really deal with, you know, what it meant to show work, you know, that touched on it in the world. So I really wanted as many eyes and ears and shoulders, around this. So it really started as like strategy, you know, and then it just became very clear that with our distribution landscape, that if I wanted sort of maximum freedom, maximum ownership, that I was really like I like just like the idea of this film just immediately, after our premiere, kind of having some screenings and then going online and not be able to do this kind of deep communal engagement, you know, after 21 years of work, like it just didn't feel right. And it's not my dream or vision of what I wanted distribution to be. So, I have multiple team. In fact, I have Eliza who's on board who just joined full time on our team. Um, I have um, I have Eight Above, which is John Reese's company.
Annie
Number
Roney is involved too, right?
Yeah, Annie is a sales agent. Um, but the theatrical booking is Eight Above with Cindy Bannock, as the theatrical booker. Um, I have Film Collaborative, Jeffrey Winters, as the film festival booker. I have Jessica Rosner as my Jewish film festival booker. So I have like a team of kind of a spectrum of bookers, you know. And I'm also a very active element in all of that. And certainly Cindy, you know, bless her, she has not dealt with a filmmaker like me before, who's just like, I need to be everywhere. If we're opening a cinema, I need to be there. Oh, wait, there's like a whole festival schedule. We're waiting for acceptances and, from different festivals. So I'm not quite sure my dates, but okay, here are dates that like, you know, a normal theatrical booker is used to just saying, here's the film, we're going to put it out in the world. And, if Chicago wants it on April 8th, when we're going to open. And then Philly could be April 7th. And then New York, um, Portland, Maine is going to be April 10th. And I'm like, no, I have to be everywhere. So, in this day and age, it's so different than Trembling and Jihad for Love, which I did also very extensive theatrical. Like, sure, you'll get a week in New York, you'll get a week in LA. Um, and we wound up extending. We held for 5 weeks in New York. I think we were the biggest box office for a documentary weekend at IFC last year, and number 7 over the whole year
Mhm.
for any film. So we did a great launch and very successful. And then we did the Lemleys in LA, and they gave us a week. and then we held over. But I was able to go to different Lemley theaters and engage different neighborhoods of LA, which was also really helpful. And, and then sometimes now it's like you get a week run, like I think we just finished yesterday in Santa Fe for a week. So I did the opening night, which sold out and which was great. But sometimes it's just one night, like I was just in Tucson at the Loft Cinema for a night, and I was in Fort Collins at the Lyric Cinema for a night, and I just did the C Center in Denver. I've been doing a whole Southwest tour,
Right.
Taos. And so I think it's like, and I'm really trying to build in, um, really kind of high profile moderators, like to do the conversation, which is great for the live event, for engaging people, and also for social.
Mhm.
Um, so Esther Perel did our Tribeca premiere, Krista Tippett, Ari Shapiro from NPR, All Things Considered, will do our DC theatrical. We've had all kinds of ministers and rabbis and thought leaders and activists and journalists. And so I really believe in this. I mean, and I see it like post fires, post election, post inauguration. Ah, the audiences really want to be together. Like there is something deep about our communal gathering that is so important for me, and I think for audiences.
So I imagine when you did the initial fundraising, a lot of your pitch was the good this will do in the world and how you're going to be out and about and the impact it could make. So when you got to Tribeca and whatever, and did you go back to the funder, the people? You had to do another round of fundraising,
Yeah,
right? To pay your costs to go around. Not many people can just afford to go
yeah,
city
yeah,
to city. So I assume you went back
yeah,
and
yeah.
asked.
I mean, I have a fundraiser now on my team as well. And we're working in putting out applications for, impact funding. I did get a very large six-figure gift from the Hearthland Foundation, which is Steven Spielberg and Kate Capshaw's foundation, for distribution impact. That was a game changer, you know.
Yeah.
I was able to raise funds from Libby Lenkinski, who has a new fund called the Albee Film and TV Fund, which is really trying to shift the narrative. It's really a progressive fund trying to shift the narrative around Israel Palestine. So, they gave us money that supported us going and doing the Jerusalem and Tel Aviv work, and we're doing non-theatrical, screenings there with actually a filmmaker, Hilla Medalia. Her company is actually
Hmm.
spearheading our non-theatrical, and
She was an
Amichai is actually.
intern for me on 51 Birch
Oh,
Street.
really? And
Yes,
Philip
a really great one.
edited her film too. And but yeah, she's like, we are just moving through Cinematex and non-theatrical, and Amichai is actually there now doing screenings. Um, but yeah, I'm like actively raising money as part of this whole process to keep moving it forward. And one thing that we're going to launch starting in September is a real college campus and high school tour. And I'm going to have my first retrospective of my work at the Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus, Ohio. And we're partnering with OSU. And we're doing, like, a lot of what we're doing too is not just film showings, but really also thinking through, like building a Friday night Sabbath Queen feast, which we did in Boston for the premiere, and we did in Atlanta, for the premiere. We're doing soul spas like we did in San Francisco, and we're doing, like, we had a drag queen king show after one of the premieres. We're doing, like, we've been building that in so that we're thinking about expanded cinema and ways to build community that is, like, really part of the whole Sabbath Queen experience. And that's been really beautiful and super meaningful for people as well. And I really want people to come together, across all of these lines.
Yeah.
Doug,
I don't.
I just want to ask Sandy why when you mentioned you have to be at every screening, which I find fantastic. And I can understand it's rewarding and all, but what is it exactly that you do?
So I think that like there's two things. One is just the like being an organizer. You
Mhm.
know, like what does it mean to be an organizer? I'm a filmmaker slash organizer, you know. Um, and so it's a lot of just like meeting people in their need. You know, there's such hunger, there's such need, you
Mhm.
know, there's such a story about this film that people want to hear. And I keep gathering stories from audience members and then sharing them on the road. So, you know, I'm also very practically putting out, you know, email lists. Like, you know, like I have now thousands of people that have signed up on my email list over the past 10 months, you know, and they're carrying the film forward. They're booking it now. They're saying, it's going non-theatrical. We want to bring it to Maplewood, New Jersey. We want to bring it to this community in Phoenix. We want to, you know, like, so we want to, there's funding possibilities. There's like so many ways as we, you know, do the theatrical, then the festivals, the non-theatrical, the synagogues, churches, conferences, retreats, you know, like campuses, high schools, like I mean, there's so much involvement, and this is a movement. Like I really am turning this movie into a movement. And you know, and so I think that's why I'm so like look, there are so many filmmakers who are like, I'm done with the film, I just want to make my next film. That's just not me. You know, I love this part of it as much as I love the filmmaking, you know, and it just, you know, we all need to find what form of film making and what form of film distribution match who we are. And thankfully, I'm a maximalist slash extrovert. So I only get fuel from all of this, you know, while, you know, my husband, who's an introvert, would be like he's like, when, you know, yeah, he could not do this. So, um,
I do not see any hands raised, so I will just happily continue on with questions. But if you do have folks out there, if you do have questions for Sandi or comments or anything you want to share, use the raised hand function. So,
oh,
Sandi,
I
you give a lot.
I see all these questions in the
Yeah,
chat.
they're on the chat, and I'm just not going to read questions from the
Got it.
chat.
Okay.
I mean, I will if nobody raises their hand. Christine, thank you. I will get to you in a moment. What would you give a lot of advice to filmmaker, your advisor, you've produced for others. What do you recommend to filmmakers in terms of impact and outreach? How soon should they be considering it? How do they build it into their films, particularly if it's not a social issue driven film?
Hmm.
What do
Hmm.
you advise filmmakers on that? Because, when you apply for a grant, they always want to know what's your outreach, who's your, and,
Hmm. Hmm.
you don't want to just say like anybody with any human with a heart. You want to be a specific
Yeah.
with a target.
You know, a lot of film, like some films don't have necessarily like a social impact strategy. Um, but
Well,
every
let's talk about
film,
the ones that do then. If they
yeah,
do,
but
and they
every
don't have the kind of budget that you had for yours, what steps should they be taking?
look, I think at this point in the documentary distribution world, we all need to really be very up to speed on hybrid distribution. You know, the deals may not come. So, like, how we be the active element in our own distribution, however that is, like, if it's, you know, if it's a film that doesn't have a social issue, but it has a real aesthetic and a real core commitment around artistry, what does it mean to tour that film to art schools, you know, internationally, you know, as well as, you know, in the US? Like, so I do think there could be, um, you know, various strategies. You know, I do think GIPA, you know, GIPA is a good source of impact producers. and finding the alignment with somebody who connects to the film in a deep way and involving them and thinking through kind of funding strategy to really pay that person, um, I think is good. Finding someone who's more emerging, who wants this opportunity and can really grow and learn through the process. Um, I think there's a little less work out there for people. So I think that, there's real opportunity to form teams, maybe earlier. Um, so yeah, I mean, um, I am acting as the impact producer for this right now. Um, certainly Eliza's coming on board to help, and I have people in different cities. But uh but yeah, I think that there's like a pool of talent out there that's being a bit underutilized.
So before we get to the question, last one for now, how do you measure? How does one measure impact? I mean, you talk about how many Q&As you did,
Mhm.
how many screenings you've had, but short of that, how do you measure? You talked about trembling being I forgot the term you used, but that it shifted,
Mhm.
the conversation. How do you argue that it shifted the conversation? I mean,
Yeah.
what does that
Yeah.
mean?
I mean, with Trembling, the metrics were much more clear because it was more of an issue film that engaged a chorus of voices. And for example, I had Orthodox synagogues agree to show the film in the synagogues. That was really important. I had rabbis who used to condemn homosexuality from the pulpit, and once they saw Trembling Before God, they stopped. We had families that disowned their children. They saw the film and started speaking to them again. We actually trained 12 facilitators who were from religious to secular in Israel because the film was going to Israeli television, and the whole school system in Israel was highly unprepared for dealing with homosexuality. So we trained people to do private screenings for 2,000 principals, teachers, and school counselors to prepare them for the broadcast and the fact that they would have these issues come up in school. We did a secret, private, underground conference that was the first ever Orthodox mental health conference on homosexuality. And we flew Orthodox and ultra Orthodox psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists into New York and trained them in queer affirmative therapy. So those were like real metrics that we could point to. And in the end, we actually helped shift the entire conservative movement, which for the first time in history opened their doors to gay and lesbian rabbis. And that enabled Amichai to go to that seminary at JTS to become a rabbi. He was
Right.
the first wave, and that came out of Trembling. And that actually allowed Benny, his brother, who saw Trembling and was involved in some of this, opening, to
Right.
trust me and to be. So that's like very clear. With this film, it's different.
Yeah.
It's not a policy change. Like one thing that I've just done is on our website, sabbathqueen.com, we have a reactions page, and I've put like, I went through it. I have like 180 pages of people writing me their stories, their reactions to the film, and I created like a 20-page distillation. So this is a little more qualitative and a little more communal and narrative, but that's how I'm trying to mark the impact of this film because it really truly is changing people's lives. Like it is astonishing the stories I'm hearing from people.
Yeah. All righty. Time for some questions. Christine, you're up first.
Yes, hi. Sorry, I'm getting over COVID. Um, Thank you so much for this film. I saw it before and then I saw it again. It's incredible. Uh, mine actually started with the Impact campaign, and then I realized it should be a film. But I'm very much along the lines of staying with this film. and not necessarily going to something else and something else. So, but this is my first that I'm directing, and I am we're in post right now,
Mm.
and given your long post journey, I'm wondering what I don't want to say mistakes, but what things you would do differently in terms of, I can't even imagine how you organize the thinking. I've got, multiple, I don't want to say characters, participants and storylines. And anyway, I'm just wondering how, obviously you had one character and then
Mhm.
secondaries, but how, what's your experience with it, and what advice would you give someone to try to make not just the editing and that process, but just the overall process go as smoothly as
Mhm.
possible?
Mhm. Well, I think, we were a pre-COVID and then in COVID and then post-COVID process. So, Philip and I worked in person for a long time, and then things went virtual. And then with my team of Francisco and Jeremy, and then we actually had an assistant editor, Kyle, who we elevated to get his first editing credit. And he was with Philip and me in person. And then, like, we had team that was in Jackson Heights, we had team that was in New Jersey, like people just moved. So I don't know if you're editing virtually or in person, but Miro boards were like our very deep friend. Google Sheets, like a lot of like different tools to kind of share. I also really believe, I mean, it made Francisco and Jeremy a little crazy, but I really believe in live, uh feedback screenings, like many of them. So, and I actually did a teenage screening that was only for teenagers and people in their early 20s, because I do think that sometimes where, we have our professionals who might be in their 30s or 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. But I think that we really, I wanted to hear a real youth voice perspective. So I highly recommend that, because that generated a lot of really interesting questions, and also, a world of people who may see feature length docs in theaters or don't, may watch more short form social media. So I think having just a whole different relationship to documentary was really important, and really curating that world and curating people who are from different worlds, just like around faith, around race, around, just neighborhood. And so that was really helpful to me. And I do feel like my feedback screening, like my Q&As at fundraisers also operated to help us with the editing too, because those generated questions, that I could really glean, like, oh, how are people reacting to this footage? So those are some things I recommend, in terms of just tools that we can use, feedback screenings, um, as well as like, just being, uh, you know, I faced a huge challenge when the team said, we need you to be a narrator. And I was like, okay. And being willing to try something, even when in the end we didn't use it. And then when they said, okay, you're like, I put my father in the film, my father who died, I put my wedding in the film. And then they were like, yeah, we're gonna get rid of all that. Like being able to, kill your babies. Like in this case, it was like really personal. So I think being willing to just be open to really radical suggestions, and not to be defensive, and to just be open to the process, because it's mysterious. It is mysterious, and it is alchemy, and it moves in ways that are very unpredictable.
Yeah, thank you. And I see there's not a ton of hands raised, but the impact campaign for me, I'm actually, I've alluded to it from the beginning of when we had materials, but now I'm adding a page and really fleshing it out, even at this stage, because we're going out for more funding, and it is a key part of how I see the distribution happening. Um, what what now as you're in it, but looking back, what might you have done differently as you were starting to put it together? And also, our fiscal sponsors, the Film Collaborative, also. So, did you mentioned Jeffrey? Is he doing that on the side? Our deck was done by someone who's at this Film Collaborative, Dave Averbach, but he didn't do it under the umbrella of that. How did that work? And then I'm done. I'm sorry.
And you're saying like, how would I have designed the impact campaign differently?
Yeah, or how would you have approached it differently, or what elements did you add on later that you were like, oh, now that we're seeing this happening, let's bring in, whatever. I
Or
love.
anything, Sandy,
Uh,
that you might have done differently
uh,
looking back on it.
so I think, by the way, Frame.io, yes, we use Frame.io. Um, I do think that we are in very turbulent times, and any expectation that we have, we really need to be willing to pivot, just constant like embrace what is. So, like I do think rejection is very much part of this process. Like it is so important to just be open and embrace that yes, there are festivals we won't get into, there are distribution companies that will say no, there are distribution companies that have disappeared that now don't have money, there are they're like, we really need to be very, very nimble and creative and resourceful, as we navigate, all these constantly shifting terrains. So, I'm in like, it's interesting because people say, "What are you working on now?" And I'm like, well, I planted the seeds. I watered these plants. Like the trees have started to grow. I'm in harvest, you know? I'm in harvest. Like that is a profound place to be. And harvest is juicy and harvest is a feast. And I'm going to maximize this film. I'm not done till millions of people see it, until it causes changing hearts and minds, until I generate serious revenue for it for myself. Like film, revenue, impact, career, art, it all goes hand in hand for me.
But do you have a
So
time? Do you have a timeline for it, Sandy? I mean, where like
I actually,
another.
I mean, already we have, Cindy, who, we started IFC in November. It is like we have bookings in September in theaters, in July and June and May, and up to like, she's like, I've never heard of this. Like this is so different. And I think, going an untraditional path, and not like throw out conventional wisdom. Like it is just like really go, So I don't think that I'm definitely on the road for another year for sure. Potentially more. I mean, Trembling, I did 3 solid years, but like we haven't even begun the universities and the non-theatrical and all of that. Um, Festivals, I am sensing in the festival world that things have also shifted. Festivals have less money, have less slots. They're a little more fighting around premiere status. So someone like me who rolls out really slowly, like there are festivals that I didn't submit to in the fall because I was like, I can't be there. Like I'm not gonna just, I mean, it played in festivals like in Bergen Film Festival in Norway. Like, you know, I was in Rome. I couldn't, Rome Film Festival was like I was in Doc Leipzig. Like, so I do think it is a little unfortunate for the field that, there is such a premiere status, and like some festivals now in 2025, they won't show a 2024 film. I think that is a loss that is part of this too. But, I think being really thinking through like the who are the real partners in this. That's something that I may have put together a little more, but I think it's just so organic and it's really unfolding in a beautiful way. So
Have you done much in the way of virtual events or doing Q&As virtually because you just logistically couldn't be there, or is it too important for you to be there in person?
I've actually not allowed, this is, I think, the first time that I've allowed the film to be viewed online.
Oh, we're
Um,
honored. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. I have not allowed film festivals to screen it virtually. I've been very firm about that. And that's worked. That's been okay. Festivals have agreed to that. Um, you know, so yeah, I really believe it as a live experience, and I want our art houses to thrive. I'm meeting the most incredible art houses across the country. It is just like, the Lyric Cinema in Fort Collins is a playground of sculpture. Like they have a resident artist who builds out an outdoor space, an indoor space. I was there when a 6-year-old to a 60-year-old were doing karaoke, like as part of the expanded playground, of the cinema. So I do think that these are treasures, and I'm gonna throw optimism into the mix here and hope, which is that I have encountered already 4 art houses that are expanding. There's a new art house in Sonoma County. Upstate Films is expanding in upstate New York. The Loft Cinema in Tucson is building out more theaters. In Bellingham, Washington, the Pickford is building out more theaters. Like, I am not going to ring the bell of doom. Like, no. Like, we are in an amazing period, so we need to, like, support this experience of cinema.
Well said. Well said, sir.
Sorry,
Um,
I'm just out of my, like,
all right.
yeah.
We can all breathe easier. Mitch, you're on camera.
Oh, hold on.
Hi.
I'm at Ashland Film Festival in the suite that they put me up, but someone's knocking on the door. Let me tell them.
We'll
Hi.
just ad lib, Mitch. Test your question out on us.
It's sure, or I could say, it's interesting hearing all this because I made a Holocaust piece 25 years ago, and we're now in a 25th anniversary mode and getting screenings for it through that. And I know one of the questions that keeps coming up is for Sandi to maybe re-mention his bookers because that's pertinent to many people. But Sandi, thank you for the work, not just the film, but all the work that surrounds it and goes beyond it, which is so vital and important. I have a question. How do you talk a little bit about your thinking about? There's a lot of ritual in the film, and there was a lot of ritual in Trembling too. And for those audiences that are less familiar with Judaica as a whole or specific rituals, how did you how did you balance the need to help people understand what the ritual they were observing is or means versus just having the experience of those rituals be put on screen?
I think one thing that I really learned was subtitling. So, for example, when we say, Amichai's father had a bar mitzvah, what we would do is we would put the whole sentence in English, and then we would italicize the word bar mitzvah and say rite of passage. So I found that this is the best way to do, we call it like Heblish or Yinglish, or, when we're moving between multiple languages. Um, so that was really important. And I think what I'm getting from audiences is that um, the we didn't dumb down. I think that they really appreciated how specific the film was to this world, this tradition and culture. I have non-Jews who just come to me and say, "Oh my gosh, this was the most educational. I learned so much about just Judaism that I didn't know." So I think there's something about really being true to the specificity of our stories from our different cultures and different ancestries, and never worrying that that's not gonna, reach a wider audience. Um, I think we're living in a world of social media where people are hearing directly from, people. And so that's been really interesting about how to like hold weighty, deep questions that are like really profound for rabbis who are grappling with and a very, very general audience.
Sandy, you mentioned before GIPA, GIPA. You said it's a list of impact producers. I assume IP stands for impact producers, A maybe association. What's the G and where do you find it?
Let me just look. GIPA impact. It's called the Global Impact Producers Alliance. It's
Okay,
called globalimpactproducers.org. You know,
great.
and there are more like Brown Girls Doc Mafia is a great
Mhm.
resource, has tons of people, on their database, public database network. That is something I use as well. Like I think that, we've become in some ways a lot more organized as the doc community, with so many different organizations. Color Congress is another great resource. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think there
I was talking to Keith Otchwat the other day, and he had a great tip, which was when you're looking for an impact producer, try and find someone who's done films in a similar subject matter to yours because they have this Rolodex of contacts and
Mhm.
they're not starting from ground zero in terms of finding who the right partners or organizations might be. So I throw that out
Well,
there.
also, and let me also say that one of my outreach people, so I have Cindy Burstein, who's an outreach person who's in Philly and with New Day Films, which is also a huge hub and a resource. Um, but I also have Rebecca, and Rebecca is part of Lab Shul. And so Rebecca, for me, is somebody who's not in film. She works in nonprofit, but she has an amazing, like, outreach personality, like is constantly organizing and has real connections in the Jewish communal world. So she's someone who came on board, and she's not in film. So I would say look at the issues, you know,
Mhm.
of communities in your movie and maybe pluck somebody from that world who may not have worked on film before.
Right. Great. Gary, you're muted, Gary.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that. Sandy, beautiful film. I just really, really loved it as a convert to Judaism, conservative egalitarian. It just really, really struck me. Um, my question is, I've been working on a film for a very long time, and I have a ton of interviews. Um, the stuff that's on the cutting room floor, are there, I know that you have even more impactful footage that is not in the film. Are there plans to do something with it? Is there, more to come, so to speak? I've been advised to kind of release little bits to promote fundraising for my film, and I'm just not sure what to put out there before the film is fully complete.
Right. So that's a really interesting question. Like, you know, releasing now, um, like in terms of social media, because I think that's a big question. My EP, Adrian, has worked in marketing and branding for Amazon and has had a company that has done his own work, and he did poster design. He's a Broadway producer, he's a film producer, a scripted producer. He actually brought on a friend who had a social media company, and they gave us like a very good deal. Um, because they are expensive, social media companies. But like we determined that Amichai did not have a TikTok presence. He wasn't going to be a TikTok rabbi. Um, Facebook was not necessarily going to grow our audience beyond my friends. I didn't find that they didn't feel like investing in Facebook would be important, but Instagram would be really, really important. So we have an Instagram campaign at Sabbath Queen Film. Um, and you can look at what we're doing, and what we're doing partly is to take some of that material and create short pieces that would go online. Like Hadassah, who was, I mean, Amichai was a retired drag queen for, for the past 10 years. And then post inauguration, I think, and post October 7th, Amichai felt like, you know what? Let's see what she's telling me. She's trying to, save us from patriarchy. Patriarchy is rearing its head in our world. And so she came back for the first time in March. So we did all of this kind of video of her coming back and, and emerging again from the Dead Sea. And now it's flooded, our Instagram. So it's been really interesting to kind of use that. I used to really create pieces for the DVD extras, and this is
Yeah.
my DVD extra channel. So Gary, I would think about, what assets you have. Sure, there is a theory, there is a school of thought of like, and I think Philip certainly does this in terms of like what you do to put a project out there to your community and really build the audience as you move towards, premiere, and as you generate your audience, and then use that potentially to prove to distributors that there is a real audience for this film. Look at our number of followers, look at our interactions. I think that for me, because the narrative and because Amichai was so complex and so delicate, I really didn't put things out before the premiere because I wanted people to see it as a whole. But yeah, I think there is something about social now that's super interesting.
The graphic design of all of your posts is incredible. I mean, it's so gorgeous and really
Yeah.
feels like it feels like the movie.
Yeah, and I think that was Adrian's, like, that was definitely a collaboration in terms of Adrian, me, the graphic designer that he's worked with, the social team, like really thinking through how do you brand and visually position a film, and like, yeah, the font. I mean, there's so many,
Yeah.
just all the different, like, and also the title. I mean, even the title of the film, it was called Rabbi for years. And finally, Francisco and Jeremy, they were like, no one wants to see a film called Rabbi. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? They were like, we think the film should be called Sabbath Queen. And I was like, oh, really? Like, I don't know. But they pushed me, and then all these people said, thank you for changing that title. I like did not like the title Rabbi. But um but yeah, thinking through even just like what image are we going to use for such a kaleidoscopic film? Like, how do we choose an image? And I choose the drag queen because it really opens up, but people come to see the film and they say, I thought this was like a drag film. And it's so much more. It's so deeper. It's so not what I expected. So how we shape our marketing and branding is like a real, I'm glad that this came up because this is something that I've really wrestled with.
I miss the days of the DVD extra. But you could have put out a whole other DVD extra about your the personal thing that got on the cutting room floor.
Right.
So I am curious. This is a sort of non-related filmmaking thing to close off on, but I'm curious in all the Q&As that you do, what's the question that comes up most in the Q&As? And I know you do many with the rabbi and many without, but is there one predominant thing everybody's kind of most curious about? Is it about navigating the Gaza situation and divide?
Definitely. I mean, I like yesterday in Ashland, I was talking to activists here for like 45 minutes after the film. So yeah. How did you begin the film? How did you end the film? Like, like like what was the editing process? The animation is a big question. I think like I think what's been interesting, like I was just in Yellow Springs, Ohio with Steve Bognar, who I don't know if you've seen American Factory.
Of course.
Um, but Steve is a dear friend, and going back to where Julia, you know, and he lived, it was very meaningful. And I did the neon cinema. I did the cinema in Yellow Springs. They have this great little art. They call it the Little Art House.
Mhm.
He did a Q&A with me, and afterwards, a woman came up to me and said, "I'm Latina, I'm lesbian, I worked for the Shoah Foundation for a little bit, and I'm really scared right now." And she just like burst into tears. She's like, "I have 3 kids. I don't know if I should leave, if I should stay. I don't know how to protect my children." And she said, seeing this film today, like seeing Amichai's courage, seeing his perseverance against so many odds, like I needed that today, and like thank you, because that's filling me with like strength and resilience. And it was really powerful, in the middle of a red state. And then I went back to with Steve to the Neon Cinema in Dayton. And I last was there with Trembling Before God in 2001. And Jonathan, who owns the theater, is gay and, doing this incredible art house in Dayton with 2 screens. And she came with a whole group, and she brought this 14-year-old. And this person sat in the audience, and I was describing how Amichai in Lab Shul doesn't do a bar or bat mitzvah. Bar is so gendered. Bar is for boys, bat is for girls. They've renamed it B. So you could be a kid and you could be any gender identity. You could be non-binary, transgender, and you don't have to choose. Like it's not, you know. So this kid, like their eyes were like this during me saying that. And they approached me afterwards and just said, "Thank you so much." They were super teary and like, "This was so meaningful for me." And, I'm thinking about like what it means to take our work around in this time and what it meant for that kid, for me to show up in that red state where there's so much attacks on, non-binary and trans folks um and DEI. And like I really, really, that's why I'm doing this. It's why I'm like, because I think there's such a need out there. And so, for me, this is the core, of why I do what I do, the way that I do what I do, um, and to just amplify that. And so that not just me and Sabbath Queen, but all of us have those abilities to be truly transformative, to truly change hearts and minds and to build, lifelines and community, and really push. Like we need to, there's so much need right now. So, that's just a little story from the road of what the experience is like as I'm meeting audiences.
Yeah. Well, that's a great and inspiring note to go out on, Sandi. Just a magnificent film, and what an accomplishment. So, thank you so much for coming and
Thank you.
sharing with us and getting up early to do it.
No,
Um,
that's great. No,
Good luck the rest of the way. And thank you, everybody. We will be back next week. We'll have a more intimate, what we call our classic face-to-face. It's usually somewhere between 30 and 60 people worldwide getting together and talking among ourselves and talking about our projects and trying, getting the help that we need for them. And then in 2 weeks, we'll be back with a conversation with Keith Otchwat. Anyway, thank you guys all.
Oh, can I just say one last
Yes,
thing?
sure, Sandi.
So just know that if anyone wants to connect, share your thoughts about the film, reach out to me, add yourself to my email list. You can always email hello@sabbathqueen.com. You can follow us at sabbathqueen.com, the website, the Instagram, Sabbath Queen Film. And, I'm on my way to Vancouver, Pittsburgh, Hartford, Austin, Beacon, New York, New York City, like Dallas, Houston, like, so if you know anyone in these cities, please send people, because I would love to connect with them and meet them. So thank you.